Good afternoon. We're delighted to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited to have Sari Bashi with us, which you've seen in the publicity. She is the executive director of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. She is the former program director of Human Rights Watch globally, and she's the author of this lovely new book, Upside Down Love, which she's going to tell us a little bit about in our conversation. So we're going to we have some questions to talk with her, discuss with her, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to add you here. Welcome, Sari.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to start here, Sari. So as I said, you're the executive director of the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, which monitors the use of torture and ill treatment of by Israeli security services against those under detention. And we have all seen videos, really terrible videos of torture and mistreatment of these prisoners. So can you tell us about the work of the organization and what are the prospects for holding the Israeli authorities accountable?
Sure. And I just want to express a word of appreciation for the work that you are doing in Massachusetts. I can say more about it later, but it's really been amazing to see how communities in the United States have been stepping up for justice and taking a very active role in taking responsibility for what the US government is doing in other parts of the world, including Israel-Palestine. So thank you for that. And it really is an honor to be with you. Regarding the Public Committee Against Torture, the organization was founded 36 years ago by a group of nurses, human rights activists who were noticing persistent torture and other forms of ill treatment, in particular through Shin Bet interrogations. The Shin Bet is like the Israeli FBI, but primarily detaining Palestinians. What we do is we try to end torture through policy work, so mitigating or ending abusive laws and practices, representing detainees, coming to see them in visits, filing complaints on their behalf, looking for investigations, where appropriate, indictments of individuals responsible for torture, and also trying to change laws and policies that make it easier to engage in torture. So, for example, policies that impede judicial review, lawyer visits, cameras, transparency in terms of people being transferred, all the things that make it easier for people to engage in torture. I'm new in this job. I have a very long record, both in the Israeli human rights community as well as the global human rights community. But I took this job after spending about 10 years working in international organizations. And I did it because I really missed the Israeli human rights community, and I wanted to have a chance to go back to direct service work and to do work here in Israel-Palestine. So I've been in this role about 2 months. It's very satisfying. It's very rewarding, particularly the individual legal assistance. But it's also very different when I last started a new job in the Israeli human rights community organization about 20 years ago. It's never been this. Torture and other forms of ill treatment are systematic because so many more Palestinians are in detention, even with the prisoner releases as part of the ceasefire deal. There's still more than 9,000 Palestinian so-called security prisoners. The vast majority of them have not been convicted of a crime. And so when you have more people in detention, there are more opportunities for people to be mistreated. And the mistreatment comes at all levels. So it comes at the policy level with the national security minister ordering a deliberate worsening of conditions for Palestinian detainees, less food, less room to move around. Since October 2023, there have been no family visits or direct communication with families, and the Israeli government is also blocking visits by the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's the neutral humanitarian organization that is tasked with making sure prisoners are being treated humanely. So Palestinian prisoners are cut off the world, cut off from their families, in some cases literally held underground in secret sites. The work we do at the individual level is helpful because families will call us. They don't know where their loved one is, or they've heard from other prisoners that they're being held and detained, and abused, but they can't visit them. And so we can go to these places that almost nobody can access because as lawyers, we are allowed to visit. And we can stand before somebody who, may have been held away from the world for months or years. And we can say, your mother signed a power of attorney form and asked us to visit you. And then he knows that his mother is alive and loves him. And he can speak with a human being who will treat him with decency and give him an opportunity to complain, to validate what has happened to him through documents, through words. And then we can go back to his family and we can say, we spoke to him, he's okay. Or we spoke to him, he's not so okay, and we're trying to get a medical treatment. And that's really important. That is not the sum total of solutions. We are looking for ways to interrupt this really entrenched abuse of Palestinian detainees. And it's very deeply linked to two features of the current regime. One is the violence of military occupation, because torture is essentially an act of violence. And the other is the racism of a regime of Jewish supremacy, because not everybody is tortured. Primarily Palestinians are tortured. And so we see our work to eradicate torture as part and parcel of work to combat the occupation and the racism that's become inherent to the regime.
Thank you. I just want to check on the audio. Mary Ellen, is Sari coming through clearly to you?
I will say that there's a little bit of breaking up, but for the most part, at least I can understand. Sorry.
Mhm.
Sorry, let me see if I can try without the headphones if that's better. Should I try that?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
See if that works.
Better?
Okay. Possibly, yeah. So can you repeat because I didn't catch,
What?
and I may not be the only one. Are you good?
I can't try it.
Can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Okay, now we can.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Let's try this then. Maybe
Let's
it'll be
try
better.
this.
So
Okay.
could you repeat something you said? You said there are two main causes. One was the occupation, and then there was number two, and I didn't catch number two.
It's the racism in a regime, what's become a regime of Jewish supremacy. And so I say that because torture is an act that's inherently violent, but not everybody is tortured. Primarily Palestinians are tortured. And that's where the racism, the Jewish supremacy comes in. Because you use violence to maintain that supremacy. So we see our work, we see the fighting the occupation and Jewish supremacy as an inherent part of fighting to eradicate torture. And eradicating torture will also make a dent in the violence and racism at the heart of the regime.
There we go. Thank you. That was clear. So what are the prospects for holding the Israeli authorities accountable for their mistreatment of the Palestinian prisoners and people in general?
In the short term, not great. Domestically within Israel, there are some cases where we're able to get investigations or even criminal prosecutions. In some cases, not often, even convictions. And look, the investigation itself, even when it's not a full investigation but an inquiry, has some deterrent effect because people are being asked questions. Security officials are being asked questions, even if their answers are accepted without scrutiny. But in a broader way, there are some moves now for accountability abroad. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that we document very well the lack of accountability domestically, because that can be important, for example, for universal jurisdiction, trying people in other courts, and also for accountability before UN bodies. Sometimes the best way to enforce international law is diplomatically. So we do a lot of international advocacy to try to get countries to put pressure on the Israeli government to stop it.
Well, we're all very interested in that because, of course, we follow closely the rulings of the ICJ and the ICC, and we were delighted to see South Africa taking the case to the ICJ. However, the mechanisms of enforcement are not really quite there yet.
It takes time. It takes time. And the mechanisms of enforcement, even for international courts, even for domestic courts abroad, are primarily political. It has a mobilizing effect and a legitimacy effect for states to then take diplomatic action. Because one of the best things you can do to hold governments accountable is, for example, to stop arming them. That'll get their attention real fast. And here I'm looking at the United States.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We're trying hard. So I want everyone to see the lovely cover of your book next to you, which is called Upside Down Love. And in your memoir, you talk about your relationship with your Palestinian husband, Osama, who is subject to the apartheid laws and including the restrictions on where he can travel. So what is your perspective as a Jewish Israeli American living in the West Bank? And how do you make your relationship work given those restrictions?
Well, the most important thing to say on Valentine's Day weekend is that we are making it work somehow, right? So that's nice. But the book is it's a love story. It's a memoir written in two voices, and the chapters alternate between my voice and his, so that it's a dialogue between the two of us and also between Israeli and Palestinian societies that we represent in the book. So before I was at Pikati, I co-founded a different organization called Gisha, which represents Palestinians from Gaza in their attempts to overcome Israeli travel restrictions. So I met Osama when I was his lawyer. He was originally from Gaza, but had been living in the West Bank for decades. And the Israeli authorities have a policy not to allow Palestinians from Gaza to move to or remain in the West Bank. At the time, it was because they had mostly abandoned territorial aspirations in Gaza. They had withdrawn civilian settlements in Gaza and were no longer actively trying to settle it with Jews, but they were and are actively trying to settle the West Bank with Israeli Jews. And so they wanted to have as few Palestinians in the West Bank as possible, and where possible, either encourage or force people from the West Bank to move to Gaza. So when I met him in 2006, he had not left the greater Ramallah area for 6 years because he was afraid that if he went too far, he would hit a checkpoint, and then the soldiers could see that his address was listed as Gaza in his Israeli approved ID card, and they could remove him to Gaza by force. And he would lose his home, his job, his son, his wife at the time. And he'd been accepted to PhD programs, both in Israel as well as in the UK, but he couldn't go because he was trapped. So I represented him in a petition before the Israeli Supreme Court and reached a settlement with the state to allow him to go to the UK and do his doctoral program and then come back to the West Bank. And he did. And by the time he came back to the West Bank, he'd separated from his wife, and we met to talk about the rest of his case. But then we ended up talking about poetry and the sea and lots of other things. And we fell in love. And it was overwhelming. I don't know which was stronger, this incredible sense of feeling this strong attraction and passion, or this incredible sense of this is completely forbidden and impossible. And it was impossible because the taboos in our respective societies were overwhelming. So for Israelis, Palestinians are the enemy, and for Palestinians, Israelis are the enemy. And it was also actually illegal for us to be together. Israeli law, for the most part, doesn't allow Palestinians to enter Israel. So he couldn't come to Tel Aviv, where I was living, to see me. And it also doesn't, it forbids Israeli Jews from entering Palestinian cities. So it was illegal for me to come to Ramallah to see him. And the book is really our struggle to overcome that and connect as human beings. But in terms of the power dynamics, they were overwhelming. I could travel. I was free. I would run through the West Bank for miles and miles. I'm a long distance runner. And he was trapped. He didn't even know where the next village was because even though it was only a few miles away, it was the other side of the moon. He couldn't get to it. Um, I, um, I had privileges that he did not have. And I was associated with the people who were confining him. So he had to get used to hearing Hebrew, a language that he associated with prison. He was jailed for protesting, and with Israeli soldiers who tortured him. He had to get used to hearing that in the mouth of the woman he loved. And it wasn't just the two of us trying to find ways to connect to each other amid so many things that would pull us apart, but also our societies. So I remember when we were, relatively earlier in our courtship, I came to visit him during Passover. I had some vacation. And so I brought matzah and they were on the kitchen counter. And a friend of his came in and saw the matzah and said, "Oh, I remember those. We used to eat those in prison with chocolate spread." And I thought, oh my God, my religion reminds him of Israeli detention centers. And that would happen over and over again. Much later on, when my daughter was born and I took her home from the hospital, our friends wanted to come to see the new baby. And I speak to my daughter in Hebrew. And so when they came, she was sleeping. And then she woke up. And so everybody's sitting on the couch and I go pick her up. And, in the silly kind of gentle voice that mothers use to talk to newborns, I said, "Oh, sweetheart, don't worry, I'll nurse you. I'll give you some milk." And as soon as I opened my mouth to speak to her in Hebrew, our friends froze. And then they laughed because they had never heard Hebrew spoken with tenderness. And so they had to get over that. And I think the laugh was that. I think the laugh was, yeah, it's just a language, because the associations were so different. So I think he and I really struggled to overcome that. But now that we have, I think there's also a potential for us to maybe have a little bit of an influence on the people around us. And that's really why I wrote the book, because I wanted to maybe encourage people who may not choose to read about the occupation, to maybe they'd just be interested in an interesting love story. And then along the way, they would learn things about what life is like here.
Hmm. It sounds like a very complicated situation to navigate with all of the intricacies and the obstacles you just mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting. It's interesting.
Very interesting. Can I ask you to clarify? I might have misheard what you said. Did you say earlier on that the Israelis were trying to move Palestinians from the West Bank to Gaza?
Yeah, so there's a number of policies. In some cases, it was direct. It was called like assigned residence. So as punishment, rather than somebody would be in administrative detention, and then they could be released if they would move to Gaza. From the West Bank. Nowadays, there's another version of it where when there are prisoner releases, sometimes people from the West Bank will be released only to Gaza. Or outside. But there are other policies as well. So removing people like my partner, who, for all intents and purposes, they're residents of the West Bank, but the Israeli government won't change their address. So they can be picked up and taken to Gaza by force. And I have clients that it's happened to. And then in some cases, it's also more coercive. So if two people marry from Gaza to the West Bank, the person from Gaza can never join the person in the West Bank. So more often than not, the person from the West Bank will go to Gaza, and then it's a push-pull to have more Palestinians in Gaza, including Palestinian citizens of Israel. So it's a phenomenon where, for example, a Palestinian woman who's either a citizen or resident of Israel will marry a man from Gaza, and then she'll move to Gaza because he can't come join her.
Before October 7th, what was the significance? What was the reason for moving them to Gaza?
So the Israeli government at the time said it was instituting a separation policy, which it said had a political and security rationale. So that's shorthand for the West Bank is close to Israeli settlements and Israeli population centers, and we don't want people whom we consider to be dangerous close by. And the political rationale was demographic. We want as much land as possible with a Jewish majority. I qualify that now because up until October 2023, mainstream Israeli policies had not actively tried to settle Gaza with Jews. There was a decision in 2005 to remove the settlements, the civilian settlements in Gaza. But since October 2023, there have been increased attempts and initiatives, including by people in the coalition government, to settle Gaza with Jews as well. So now, certainly under the current circumstances, they're not letting people from the West Bank come into Gaza either. And it's unclear the map of their territorial ambitions in terms of Jewish settlement.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we're hearing now of this proposed move to allow more Israeli settlers to take over land of the Palestinians in the West Bank. Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I should say is that Israel holds Gaza and the West Bank under belligerent occupation, having captured the territories in 1967. And under the laws of war, belligerent occupation is a temporary situation. The UN Charter does not permit acquiring territory annexation by force. And so it has to be temporary, and it has to be the control of the territory has to be for the benefit of those people living there. Transferring civilians from the occupying state into the occupied territory is against the law. It can be a war crime. So the entire project of having more than 700,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank is part of a war crime that essentially turns the West Bank into a territory that the Israeli government is de facto annexing. So there's many different legal procedures by which the Israeli government takes over land in the West Bank. And the newest one is to declare many more swaths of land to be eligible to be settled on by declaring them state land as opposed to private property or some other use.
Yeah. We didn't know there were so many mini steps to achieving annexation.
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's ongoing.
It's on, yeah. So let's turn our attention for a minute to Gaza. We all know about Trump's so-called peace plan and the so-called ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire because more than 500 Palestinians have been killed since the plan went into effect. And so what is your reading of the current situation in Gaza and your analysis of Israeli and U.S. policies and the Palestinian options?
Abby, you're breaking up. I can actually repeat the question.
Yeah.
So in terms of the peace plan and the many hundreds who have been killed and how Israel continues to bomb, we know that they've opened the gates of Rafah, but the number of people leaving is minuscule, and there are a few people returning to Gaza. What is your reading of the current situation in Gaza and your analysis of Israeli and U.S. policies and Palestinian options?
Sure. So look, the ceasefire is a relief. There's more food, there is less violence, but there still are significant shortages and a very high level of violence. Right now, the Israeli government is directly occupying more than half of Gaza, and that part of Gaza is off limits to Palestinians. So it's people who've been squeezed already into a very small strip of land are now confined to less than half of that strip. While some humanitarian goods are coming in, the banking system is not fully functioning. People don't have money, and so people are really struggling. And rebuilding materials, even humanitarian items like tarpaulins for tents in the rain, are hard to come by. In particular, young people don't see a horizon. Gaza is destroyed. And it's, the US, which has talked about, the US and Israel, which have talked about reconstruction, are talking about reconstruction in that part of Gaza that is off limits to Palestinians, behind the so-called yellow line of direct Israeli occupation. So it's not really clear if it's reconstruction for whom. While Trump has walked back some of his earlier calls to remove Palestinians from Gaza and resettle it with other people, on the ground, it's not clear that those plans have been abandoned. Palestinians are still not being allowed to return to Gaza. Rafah, as you mentioned, is very minuscule at this point. It's mostly a very small number of medical patients seeking care abroad and a small number of people being allowed to come back. But there are very disturbing reports of what it's like for returnees, including them being taken from Rafah crossing by armed gangs that are allied with the Israeli military, and then taken for Israeli military interrogation in ways that are scary, are very scary. So, Gaza is still mostly closed. And so not enough has changed. And the U.S. peace plan is worrying. I mean, creating a neo-colonial board of peace to govern Gaza with, very little appreciation for the idea that people should be able to govern themselves, and conditioning reconstruction on Hamas disarming under circumstances where the Israeli military couldn't fully disarm Hamas in, 2 years of bloody warfare. So how is that going to happen now? It's unfortunately a way of saying reconstruction is not going to happen, or at least not going to happen for the people living in Gaza. So the situation is not encouraging. I think that Palestinians in Gaza have always been maybe the most resilient. Gaza, Gaza was created in its modern form from refugees who were ethnically cleansed from what's now Israel in 1948. And so, 2/3, 3/4 of the population are refugees and their descendants. And there's always been something very resilient about people in Gaza. It's just that resilience keeps getting tested again and again. So I think that people in Gaza are continuing to try to make lives for themselves. And there's beautiful, beautiful stories about running schools in tents and art in tents and, all kinds of things that people are doing to make something out of nothing. But they need a little bit of help. They need a little bit of help, not just money, but also the political will to allow people to return, to allow people to rebuild, and to, at the least, allow people to be able to live in all parts of Gaza.
We have, of course, seen their amazing resilience in all the videos that we've been watching on YouTube and TikTok, and we're Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite amazing. I should have asked you, and I think you speak Arabic now?
I'm sorry?
Do you speak Arabic now?
I do, but it needs work.
Okay, all right. So in a minute, I want to open this up to the audience to ask their questions. I might go back to a question from earlier because this connects to Gaza. Can you talk about the economy in the West Bank and how that connects to the situation in Gaza?
Yeah. So people sometimes talk about Gaza as being the canary in the coal mine, a place where the Israeli authorities pilot different policies that they later roll out in the West Bank as well. So, for example, in the 1990s, the Israeli government built a fence around Gaza, and in the early 2000s, they built a wall around many different parts of the West Bank. The travel restrictions on Gaza requiring people to have permits to enter and leave started there, and then several years later applied to the West Bank as well. So there's always been a bit of piloting, and I think at least as recently as 20 years ago, and probably earlier, the Israeli government began restricting economic activity in Gaza in ways that really made it very dependent, certainly on the Israeli economy, but also on humanitarian aid. There was a period of time where people in Gaza were only allowed to receive charity. They were lists of what was allowed in and what was not allowed in, and anything that could be an input for a factory, for something that would provide jobs was deliberately banned, as part of a policy to deliberately cripple the economy in Gaza. And certainly that's still the case right now. There hasn't been cash allowed into Gaza. It's very difficult to get money into Gaza, and there's anything that could have provided a livelihood, including agricultural lands, has really been destroyed. That's coming to the West Bank as well. At least that's the fear. So since October 2023, more than 100,000 workers from the West Bank who used to work in what were relatively higher paying jobs in Israel have not been allowed to reach their job in cash here. The Israeli government is withholding millions of shekels of tax monies that it owes the Palestinian Authority. And that means that the Palestinian Authority is either not paying or only partially paying salaries for teachers, for sanitation workers, for people who need to get paid. So, like, for example, the schools in the West Bank are only in person 3 days a week because the teachers aren't getting paid full salaries, and they say we can't afford the transportation. So things are really being squeezed. There's obviously very little tourism. It's very difficult to get goods in and out, and it's very difficult to travel. In the last few years, in particular the last few months, the travel restrictions have become much more onerous. So it used to be that if you wanted to go from here to here, a distance of maybe 5 miles, maybe you had to travel 20 miles because the roads were closed and you had to go around. And then it became 30 miles and 40 miles and 50 miles. And it's to the point where you have to travel a very long distance to reach a main road because Palestinian cities and towns are enclosed by iron gates that are closed. And so you have to, try to reach an exit out of what's essentially become a Palestinian enclave to get to a main road that'll connect you to another city. So that's not good for lots of things, including for commerce and the ability to run an economy. Things are hard here. Things are really hard.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to open it up in just a minute. I just wanted to share a story with you, Sari, which is I remember being in Yamit in Gaza, which was one of the Israeli settlements before they got rid of them, took them out, in which they had hydroponic tomatoes growing in these greenhouses. And when they removed the Israeli settlements, they destroyed all of these greenhouses so that the Palestinians wouldn't be able to benefit from them.
Yeah, there were a lot of complicated issues with the destruction.
Yeah.
That took place.
Okay, so thank you for all of that. Let's open it up to the audience. We're a small group today. We're going to let you ask your question verbally. If you could raise your computer hand and we'll call on you. And the hand is down at the bottom of your screen there. Just click on that hand and then we'll let you ask your question. Nancy, how do we unmute them? Mary Ellen's going to do that.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. A question I have is about the education system in the West Bank, which I understand there's a whole new curriculum that is being imposed on all schools, including what were UNRWA schools. Do you know anything about that? I don't know if it's been fully rolled out yet, but I believe it does things like sanitize the curriculum, make it much more like an Israeli history that kids are getting, keeping out the Nakba and the whole history from the Palestinian point of view. Have you heard or seen it yet? Is it there?
It hasn't been rolled out yet, and there's been a lack of transparency about what the changes are. I don't know the contents of it, but there have been reports that some of the funders to the Palestinian Authority, including European funders, have been pushing through changes in the curriculum. But I couldn't tell you more about what those changes are, except to say that the PA is very dependent on foreign funding, so they often listen to what foreign funders tell them to do.
Thank you.
Who else? Who else has a question? Sunny.
Sunny, hold on, Sunny. Let's see if this. Can you unmute yourself, Sunny?
Sunny, you need to click on the audio at the bottom left-hand corner.
There should be a prompt on her screen, but it's not happening. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. The prompt was very slow in coming. That unmute was possible. So thank you for your patience. In thinking about the so-called Trump peace plan, from your perspective, what are the most important things to say in countering the ridiculousness of that proposal?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't know a lot of people who think it's legitimate to deny self-determination to a population and have a board of everybody who's not Palestinian come in and rule an area. We used to call that colonialism or neo-colonialism. So I think that's problematic, and the fact that that was that received an approval from the UN Security Council by way of a resolution is really disturbing, because the UN Charter also talks about the right to self-determination, meaning the people who should be sovereign are the Palestinian people. The second thing I would express concern about is the linking of reconstruction to Hamas disarmament, because reconstruction is for civilians in Gaza who badly need it, and it's people are dying from stupid things. They're dying from cold. They're dying because their tent caught fire, because they're cooking off of some improvised stove. They need to be able to rebuild, and linking that to a military goal that the Israeli military wasn't able to achieve in 2 years of intensive warfare is essentially holding civilians hostage in ways that are not sanctioned by international law. And I think the third thing I would say is that it really represents an entrenchment of US and Israeli control indefinitely over Gaza, over Palestinian lives, in ways that people should be opposing. And one thing to note is just how many countries are signing up for this peace plan. Turkey and Egypt and European countries, and that should really give us pause. Why these countries are backing it. I mean, we know that people don't want to oppose Donald Trump, but there's a really high cost to that. And it's not that I think that governments are going to change their position vis-a-vis the Trump administration, but I do think it's an opportunity to rally the regular people who see this as being wrong. And that's certainly true in the United States, but also in other countries, in some of these countries where people are very opposed to indefinite Israeli control over Palestinians, but their governments are actually supporting and facilitating that through this peace plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Siham? Can you unmute, Siham?
Okay, my question is, there is natural gas in the Mediterranean Sea by the Gazan coast. Is that why Trump is interested in taking over Gaza? Because he wants to take the mineral ice like he's doing, the mineral gas like he's doing in Venezuela's oil?
I don't think the quantities are significant enough for that to be a major factor. I mean, I don't think so. I think that Gaza is more symbolic in terms of like a seat of resistance, and a resistance to certainly to Israeli control, but also to US support for it. And so I think, for Trump, he wants to say that he's made peace in the Middle East. Doesn't feel like peace receiving it, hiding in the closet with my kids because Iran is raining missiles in the area. It doesn't feel very peaceful. But that's what he's marketing. And for Israel, I can say Gaza has always been important because it's seen as a bastion of resistance. It's Israeli officials openly talk about how problematic it is that there are so many Palestinian refugees in Gaza who are dreaming of coming home. They see that as a threat to the Jewish character of the state. And so there's always been a very strong focus on Gaza by Israelis, and the US is currently supporting the Israeli administration.
Now, the Europeans have not all of them, but a lot of them have recognized the West Bank, as, Palestinian territory. And so there's absolutely no way, no possible future plan to unite the West Bank and Gaza and build a bridge between the West Bank and Gaza with no exits in the Israeli territory. No such thing ever happened, you think?
European recognition of Palestinian statehood has not referred to borders. So we recognize a Palestinian state, and neither Israel nor Palestine have defined borders, defined boundaries. Israel has armistice lines, ceasefire lines as of 1949. There's no formal border. But through the Oslo peace accords back in the 1990s, most countries recognized Gaza and the West Bank as a single territorial unit. And at the time, there was also a promise to allow travel between those two parts of the territory. The UN's backing, the UN Security Council backing this Gaza peace plan is a step backward from that recognition. It wasn't just European countries, it was a majority of countries overwhelmingly recognizing Palestinian statehood, because instead what it essentially did was sanction control over Gaza, not through self-determination, but through foreigners. And also saying we recognize Palestinian aspirations for statehood, which is a pretty far step back. And that was only if the PA reforms, we recognize Palestinian aspirations for statehood. So that's a step back. But I'm not sure that the goal right now is to build a bridge between Gaza and the West Bank. As somebody who lives here, I can say that I don't live in a two-state reality. I live in a one-state reality. There's one government exercising sovereignty de facto and de jure by law and by fact between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. And there are subcontractors. So there's local authorities like the PA, and there are armed groups that exercise local administrative functions like Hamas. But there's one overall government exercising sovereignty. And we're all living together. We're just living together badly. And so I don't know that you could divide things up into two states with a land bridge or some kind of bridge between Gaza and the West Bank. But what I would like would be equality, for us to just live together as equals in this
One
space.
state, you think? You think in one state?
Yeah, because I think that when people talk about a two-state solution, they're talking about perpetuating the ethnic cleansing of 1948, because they mean a Jewish state at the very least within the 1949 armistice lines, and a Jewish majority was achieved within those borders by ethnically cleansing the area of Palestinians and then blocking their return. So if the only way you can have a Jewish majority in those borders is through ethnically cleansing the people who have a right to be there, it's not okay.
You mean in the West Bank, ethnically cleansing again in the West Bank?
Also, yes. I mean, it's going on all the time. So there's been, particularly in the last 2.5 years, a stepping up of forcible transfer of communities. Sometimes it's through settler violence. So settlers will terrify communities until they leave. Sometimes it's through the Israeli army going to refugee camps in the northern West Bank and ordering people to evacuate and then destroying their homes. But the ethnic cleansing is happening all the time. And in those areas, then more and more land is being used for Jewish settlers. So it's ongoing, but it's past and present in the sense that the Palestinian refugees and their descendants who either fled or were forced to leave their homes in the 1948 war, they have a right to come back. And the reason that right is not being respected is in the name of having a Jewish majority. But if the only way you could have a Jewish majority is through ethnically cleansing other people, that's not okay. And it doesn't seem that complicated to just have equality, have a government who represents everybody, rather than a government who treats some people better than others. You know, I mean, I think for Americans, the idea that people should just be equal should be intuitive.
Right.
Now,
Siham,
now,
thank you for your questions. I'm going to move on because there's other people here. Cheryl?
Yes, hello, and thank you to Mappa, to Abigail, and to Sari for very detailed and good, helpful responses. I'm very familiar with the situation and have some dear friends in the West Bank. Here are my questions. Do you, Sari, ever have to fear for your safety since you are married to a Palestinian? And is he could he even envision leaving Palestine should he have to or want to for any reason? And I also recently read a very deep analysis calling the Israeli society almost like it's in the DNA of Israel to be genocidal. And you can't reform such a society. It has to be completely changed. Could you please comment on that? Thank you.
Sure, and maybe on the last one, because I get really nervous when people talk about DNA and genocide. I don't think Israeli Jews and Palestinians are any better or worse than anybody else. There's a system of oppression that is assigning roles to people, and most people play their roles that are assigned to them. And so what we need to do is transform the system. And when we transform the system, the society will also be transformed, slowly or quickly. I don't know. But I would really caution against thinking about any kind of evil or genocidal tendencies being in people's DNA. It's not the way the world works. Regarding safety and leaving, I mean, look, you know, I live in a place that's not safe, and it's been significantly less safe in the last 2 years. So yes, yeah, I'm always dealing with security concerns of all kinds, as is my partner, as is really everybody living here, Palestinians and Jews. You know, there's a lot going on, whether it's, you know, missiles or soldiers or armed men, you know, everything in between. I'm lucky that, you know, I'm okay. My family is okay. I live with my partner and our 2 kids. We live in the West Bank. We're lucky. We have enough money to buy what we need. We have a lot of love, and we're able to make a good life. But would we leave if things got particularly hard for our kids? Yeah, we're always kind of watching. We're always, it's hard to know. I have a lot of friends who raise their kids in places that have been chosen. So places with homogenous values where the kids go learn and study and live in communities of people who are like-minded. And I think that can be really powerful. That's not an option we have. And so I do think that kids seeing many different worlds like my kids do is an advantage, but I guess within boundaries. So we're always checking. I do think, look, my kids speak 3 languages. They move in many worlds. They're fabulous. They're these mixed kids who can code switch on a dime. But we're watching.
That's sweet. Frank, can you unmute?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Sari, thanks for this presentation. It's very, very inspiring what you're doing. And I have a question about the stability of the Netanyahu government. Just before October of 23, he was about to be indicted, if I understood, for corruption. And there was a big battle with Supreme Court, and he lost a lot of support among the Jewish Israelis. And during the war, as their sons were being conscripted and getting wounded in Gaza, there was further opposition among the center left, whatever's left of it, because the wagons were circled around the government. during the invasion of Gaza. What is the status now? Is there opposition? There are refuseniks who during the war refusing to be enlisted and go serve in Gaza. What is the situation with is there a possibility that now, supposedly winding down, hopefully, that the Israeli people will abandon that circling round the wagons kind of mentality?
Hmm. So Netanyahu has, in recent history, has not had a majority of support, but he's had a significant plurality. So maybe 30, 40% support. And then he's been able to put together a pretty stable coalition, including with the ultra-Orthodox, to get a majority of seats. And that's been true, throughout, even before this government, even in the previous government. He was indicted before the war, and he's been on trial consistently during the war as well. And there are a lot of people who don't like that, but there are a lot of people who don't care. And more to the point, in the Knesset politics, the parliamentary politics, the right wing has a very clear majority. So even if it's a right wing that's opposed to Netanyahu, there's a very clear majority. During the war, opposition to Netanyahu actually increased. There was a circling the wagons in terms of the military and the state, but not for the government. There was a lot of opposition to the government, including because he's refused to take responsibility for October 7th, which was a military and intelligence failure in terms of allowing so many hundreds of civilians to be massacred like that. And the security apparatuses have taken responsibility. The heads of the military and the Shin Bet have all resigned, and he's blocked any kind of investigation into the government's conduct on October 7th, 2023. This government will end soon. Elections are due in October and they may come sooner, but I don't know that he wouldn't win again. Or even if he didn't, it may be that what happened last time would happen again, which is that an unstable alternative coalition of people who the most that they have in common is that they don't like him would come together and form a government, but it would be short-lived because they don't agree on anything else. He's a survivor.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Frank. So we're running up against, are you, I know Siham has asked, do you want to end it here, Sorry, or will you take one more?
Can I just end on a more positive note? Is that okay?
Of course, go ahead, go right ahead.
We didn't get a chance to talk about transformation. And I wanted to say something about that. So things are bad. You're not imagining it, they're really bad. But this regime is collapsing. The things that used to hold together the Israeli regime, legitimacy in the West, a strong economy, people very motivated to serve in the army, a good regulatory environment, a professional civil service. It's really collapsing. You have a lot of people who have money, who have education, who have a foreign passport leaving. The people who stay behind have less access to foreign capital. The ultra-Orthodox community is growing in size, but they're not integrated either into the economy or into the military. Netanyahu has been introducing a politicization of the civil service, of the regulatory environment in ways that are weakening the economy. And the ratings have gone down. Foreign investors are leaving. It's collapsing. And that means that there are opportunities, because when something collapses, something else will take its place. And what that is up to us. And I don't want to pretend this collapse is going to be short-lived. It's not going to stop tomorrow, and it's going to be very violent. So we're in for a continued bad period. But now is the time for you to keep doing the work that you're doing, particularly in changing US public opinion and US policy, because that's probably the most important possibility we have for transforming life here into one of justice and equality. So I'm really grateful to be with you today. And I want to say that what you're doing matters, maybe now more than ever.
Thank you. Well, we are very grateful for having you here, and thank you so much for a superb conversation. I want you to see before you go. Mary Ellen, can we unmute everyone? I want you to see people's appreciation, Sari. So could all of you turn on your cameras and give her a round of applause? Come off mute and tell her thank you. Put your appreciation in the chat box just to let her know how much we appreciate her being here.
Thank
you so much.
Try that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank
Sari.
you.
What a wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
Sorry. Thank you. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all for coming on Valentine's Day.